example of how slot machines at casinos operate was used intentionally in this book. There are several reasons for this. One reason is that the vast majority of the work world utilizes a type of reinforcement similar to slot machine payouts. If you've ever wondered why certain jobs pay every day, some pay every week, some pay every other week, and others pay monthly and even quarterly, the reason is that a schedule of necessary reinforcement has been worked out for each job. Most professionals get paid twice a month or less often. The reason is that in the job they do, they can sustain an effort for a fairly long time before they get a payoff. When a person is doing a job he or she enjoys and has chosen, the work itself has an intrinsic reward. In general, the more aversive a job is and the less enjoyment it has, the more often people tend to get paid. Aversive jobs usually pay more often, but in smaller amounts. In a casino, few people would keep pumping money into a slot machine if it didn't pay off fairly often. But even though most people do lose, the small wins and the perception that they can win big are enough to keep them going. The same is true in some jobs. People will stay with certain companies because they like the benefits, like the people, need the money, are fearful of change, or because they feel trapped. Some people believe they can move ahead into a better job if they stay with a particular company long enough, but not everyone is realistic about their situation. The most important reason the casino example was used relates to being realistic. Slot machines are a game of chance, well, sort of chance. There is a random element to it, as every machine has to provide a winner on some sort of basis. Then there is the aspect of what was called an unseen background. While casinos tell us over and over that slot machines are random, the unseen background determining payoffs isn't random. Casinos decide how much profit they need to make from slot machines and adjust payouts accordingly. At the same time, the amount of money being pumped into slot machines is constantly calculated. Each machine is entered into the calculation. By definition, this isn't random. And there is another factor involved. Individuals slide those handy casino player reward cards into machines that tell the system who they are, where they live, how much they typically gamble, how often they gamble, and sometimes how much they're worth. Precisely how this information is used to determine big winners on slot machines isn't public knowledge, but you can bet it enters the equation somewhere. People make choices that lead to all this information. It's not skill that's involved, and it's not really chance either. That's a really interesting fact, but one shouldn't think too long about it. The world of work has some similarities to casino payouts, but also it has some big differences. Chance, or luck, probably matters in the work world. Being present at a specific time and place when an opportunity arises might be looked at as chance or luck, but there's always a background operating in the work world. Some of this background is seen, but a lot of it is unseen. Some employees are favored over others. Discrimination against or for specific characteristics or people certainly exists, and interrelationships are a factor. Reinforcement and rewards are being sought in the work world, just as in a casino. Salaries and revenue are balanced with desired profits. And there are some people in both casinos and the work world who try to cheat or trick others. But the big difference is this: skills, abilities, attitudes, and personal behavior matter in the work world. A person's behavior and skills do have a predictable influence on jobs, unlike slot machine playing in a casino. How much do skill, ability, attitude, and personal behavior really matter in the work world? My answer is this: I don't know. I'd guess it depends entirely on other factors influencing specific work sites and jobs. What I do know is this: an individual's skills, ability, attitude, and behavior are the only elements in this that are almost completely under the person's control. The only things under your control are the things you do. You can always obtain more skills and ability. You can change your attitude. The specific behaviors and habits you perform day after day are choices you have made. These can change if you choose to do so. Many workers really don't understand why some individuals receive promotions and others don't. There are a lot of reasons for this, and not all of them seem fair or reasonable. There are, for example, prejudices that sometimes influence promotions. But one surprising aspect of promotions is seldom recognized. In general, people don't get promoted because they do their jobs. Doing the job is simply expected. Promotions are most likely when an individual solves problems and displays the ability to fulfill more responsibility. An individual's drive and desire are also a factor. At the beginning of this session, there was a quote by George Bernard Shaw. He wrote, "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself." What I haven't given is the last part of the quote, but it'll be presented soon. For the moment, let's try to understand this statement as it pertains to work. I've seen some people work in what was essentially a family business arguing that they were treated unfairly. What they often meant was that family members of the owner were given preferential treatment. My typical reply to such a complaint usually starts with a question. Did something illegal or unethical happen? Or are you simply unhappy with the outcome? For example, if the business owner announces that his son, who has never worked and has no experience, is now the boss, is this illegal? Perhaps in a very few specific cases it might be, but these almost never occur. Family businesses are typically handed down from the older generation to a younger one. Is it unethical? Again, it's possible, but it's not probable. If one takes a realistic look at such a situation, what is to be expected? What's the typical thing that happens in family businesses? In some, one has to examine the background of specific jobs to get a reasonable understanding and develop reasonable expectations. A reasonable person tries to get a good understanding of the background. A reasonable person adapts to the situation. Unreasonable people demand the situation adapt to them. I can give a glaring example here. I know several convicted sex offenders of children who decided during their treatment that they wanted to work with youthful victims of sex offenders. That is, they wanted to be counselors. Many alcoholism counselors are former alcoholics, so can't the same thing happen when a sex offender reforms? The answer is basically no, it can't. There are laws in place that make it next to impossible for that to happen. The want-to-be counselors argued that it was unfair, but it's a useless argument. They want the world to adjust to them, but it's just not reasonable. In essence, what this discussion is building up to is for you to understand the importance of the background of your work, as well as coming to an understanding of what is reasonable at work. Then you have to decide what you need to do, because what you decide and what you do are the only things under your control. Definitions of the term fairness include the words just, impartial, unbiased, and equitable. But I've heard the word unfair far more often. In my experience, when I've encountered people who define something as fair or unfair, what they really mean is something quite personal. Something is fair when they get what they want. Something is unfair when they don't get it. Over a 10-year period, I hired about 40 counselors for jobs in criminal justice. For each of the people who got hired, another 10 or so were not hired. Those who got hired typically seemed to believe that they were the best person for the job, that they had the most qualifications, and so on. It was a fair process as far as they were concerned. On the other hand, many that were not hired challenged the process as unfair, claiming that they were the best qualified, and so on. In essence, far more people saw it as unfair than fair. So, was the outcome really fair? Was it just, impartial, unbiased, and equitable? The honest answer is yes and no. An equally applied process was always used. Only individuals who were pre-screened as qualified were interviewed. The same questions were asked of everyone. But I'm certain that both myself and the other people I used during the interview process had biases. I'm also certain that we did the best we could do in each circumstance. Maybe there is a better way to make such decisions, but none of us designed the governmental hiring process. I will add that on some occasions, the wrong person was hired. Was that fair? I really can't answer the question because I'm not sure that fair or unfair is the important issue. There is a bigger reality issue to such a question of fairness. That is, there's always a complex background that is largely unseen and unrecognized. As to the issue of fairness, it's complicated. Here is a real-life event that relates to this. On a neighborhood walk today, I briefly watched two brothers playing basketball. One of them was older and was at least twice as tall as the younger one. The taller one blocked every shot his small brother tried to make. Was that fair? Again, I don't know if it's fair. I suppose it depends on a lot of things. What I do know is that it's reality. As a child, I tried to compete against an older, taller, stronger brother and never won, but I chose to compete against him. Likewise, all of my jobs in life were a result of choices. I've played slot machines a bit, but I've never played the state lotteries that claim to pay hundreds of millions of dollars. You've probably heard that the odds of winning a lottery are less than dying in a car accident or being struck by lightning. I was actually struck by lightning when I was about 21, but I'll never win a lottery. Of course, people say somebody has to win, and you can't win unless you play. Okay, that's true. At least, I think so. I do hear on a fairly regular basis that nobody won because nobody had the right numbers. That nobody does seem to win often. I've also read a bit about how very few lottery winners turn out to have happy endings. But everybody seems to say, I have a plan, so it won't happen to me. I'm not so sure that having a plan for this unlikely event is such a good thing, unless you actually win. I have talked to quite a few people who have a retirement plan based solely on winning a lottery. I won't even comment on that. I don't think that there's much I can say about it that will matter. But I believe that there's something fundamentally right about living life in a certain way, and the lottery doesn't fit into my values. And fantasizing about what one would do with a suddenly appearing 100 million may actually show that a person is living in a fantasy rather than finding and living within their right path through life. These words aren't meant to keep anyone from playing the lottery, because if you do play, this won't change it. What I am saying, however, is that finding your right path in life and living within that path should be a major focus of your attention. One has to put aside fantasies to find that path. Once a person settles into their path, fantasies can get in the way of living within it. Here's a common example of what I mean. Because of human biology, predetermined by genetics, the vast majority of humans go through a process of having a series of relationships and seeking out partners. This process usually begins around age 12 or so. While reproduction is the primary drive underlying this biologically determined process, other factors come into play that create a need for more complexity in relationships that transcend sex. Relationships create a sense of meaning and excitement, as well as stability and safety. But finding the right partner is just not that simple. People tend to look for a partner that fits. This means that when we look for a suitable partner, a lot of issues come into play, including physical characteristics, personality, and interests. Most people do some bending as they try to adjust to different people and different situations. Bending means that you try to appear to be something you aren't. This is a fairly deep topic that can't be adequately discussed here. Perhaps the easiest way to understand it is to make a generalization about it. Whenever a person tries to impress someone else, they are usually bending themselves to fit into a belief. When people do things out of their ordinary, dress differently, talk differently, or clean up their appearance or room to make an impression, they are bending. Obviously, it's a normal thing to do, but it's done to obscure the truth. It is a completely normal and common way to manipulate others, to a point. On some ideal level, when a person gets married, they've essentially committed to a specific individual as their partner for life. But that's not true, at least as often as it is true. The biological drives continue to exert an influence, sometimes through all life. Men in particular engage in a lot of sexual fantasizing. Of course, women also do this, but men tend to do it a bit more. Many people fantasize about relationships with others and go beyond the fantasizing. The strength of the drives underlying this behavior is attested to by the following fact. Almost everyone knows such relationships nearly always end with people getting hurt, but they do it anyway, hoping. Earlier in this program, the importance of the present moment, the here and now, was discussed. How it relates to the present discussion is simple. Fantasizing keeps a person from coping with the present moment. It loosens commitments and turns attention from reality. Fantasizing about another person gets in the way of living with what you have. The same is true as it relates to work. Fantasizing isn't quite the same as planning, and it can certainly get in the way of attending to what needs to be done in the present moment.